Now, it does me great pleasure to introduce two wonderful individuals that I know are going to provide rich conversation today. And we are always so elated when individuals say yes to our invitation. So today is no exception. I am so excited for you all to be able to meet and to hear from these two individuals. So as I normally do, I want to give them a formal introduction. Then we will invite them to unmute themselves, join the conversation, and just greet us in their own way. The Darkest Horse is a minority and woman-owned next-gen diversity, equity, and inclusion. And is that ability or accessibility? What does the A stand for you all? Go ahead and let me know that. I want to make sure this audience is clear.
Yeah, accessibility.
Accessibility, great, thank you. Consulting firm obsessed with helping the workforce and organizations to explore the intersections of 4 domains. Radical inclusion, we're going to talk about that. That word radical, I'm sure, is very intentional, so we're going to unpack that. The future of work, emerging technology, and health, well-being, and human potential. It was founded by Rada and Chanté, who were brought together by their shared interests and passion to challenge the status quo, and they find their strength in the differences between them and how they see the world. They proudly celebrate their difference and encourage their clients and partners to do the same. So please welcome with me at this time, Chanté Thurmond, as well as Rada Yovovich. And I want them just to greet you in their own way. And I want the audience here to please, let's find some ways, either through the chat, maybe through some reactions, through Zoom, to let them know that we are so excited that they're here sharing and that we appreciate their time. So Rada and Chanté, whatever one of you would like to start, just go ahead and greet us in your own way. What do we not know about you from just reading your bio that you would like to share?
Oh, here we go. Yeah, sorry. I was like, oh, I'm spotlighted. Chanté and I, every time that we do start anything, we're like, do you want to go first? Do you want to go first? Chanté, would you like me to kick us off here? Okay, cool. Hi, I'm Rada. I use she, her pronouns. And today I'm coming to you from the unceded territories at the Council of Three Fires, colonially known as Chicago. And I identify as a queer, cis, white, mostly able-bodied. I'm actually hearing impaired, raised and educated in the US woman. And at the Darkest Horse, we like to kind of give our intros less through credentials and titles and degrees and more through those kinds of identities, because we really recognize what a huge part that plays in how we move through the world, how we experience the world, how we understand the world, and also sort of what we need to feel belonging and inclusion and things like that. And for anyone with any visual impairment, I'm a white woman with in my 30s with long straight black hair, wearing a light blue collared shirt in a room with brown walls and some art and a lamp behind me.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Rada. And we're so appreciative of the intentionality around disability justice and sharing the way that you have. And so thank you kindly. Chanté.
Thank you so much. Hey, everyone. Chanté Martinez Thurmond. My pronouns are she, her, ella. I'm also coming to you from the unceded territory of the Council of the Three Fires, colonially known as Chicago, the suburbs to be exact, if I'm being honest. And to follow form, I just want to give my visual representation of who I am today. I'm a mixed race millennial woman with curly hair and wearing glasses, a black tank top and a purple top. And I'm sitting, I think, in a whitish background, or sitting in front of a whitish background. And as Rada mentioned, we like to share kind of our intersectional identities, and how I enter the conversation today is as a mixed race, multicultural, proud Black and Latina woman. I'm cis, able-bodied, mother of twins. I consider myself 1.5 generation American, daughter of a Mexican immigrant and proud descendant of Black slaves who come from the South, and now I'm in the Midwest. And so, yeah, that's me. And if there's any other things that I forgot, I'm sure we'll get to them later in this conversation.
I so love that. So I just want to encourage this audience to take notice of the way in which you both beautifully modeled an introduction that I think is not quite as common, but what would happen if it were common and we all would take the time to really share all of those intersecting identities about ourselves and how in which we're entering conversations. I think it's such a beautiful thing. And so hopefully that serves as a takeaway, maybe that members of this community will find valuable to incorporate. So let's dig right in. I want to talk about the darkest force. And so obviously, again, I think that so much about the work that you all do is very intentional, even like the name of the darkest force. And so let's unpack the name and what that means, and why is this work so critically important for the two of you. And Rada, we'll start with you, and I'll let the two of you just kind of take turns starting and leading in as we present questions.
Awesome. Yeah, well, honestly, the title, Chanté gets 100% of the credit for the title. This whole vision really was Chanté's vision from the beginning, and I just got the very, very great fortune of meeting her in a moment of like, well, she's always in a moment of great vision, but I was lucky to show up and appear and be invited along on this journey. So I will do my best to do it all of the justice. And I think the title, The Darkest Horse, references back to a phrase, that dark horse, which has been around since the 1800s. And it's typically used a lot in the US and in the UK, primarily in sort of like political and sports contexts. But really what it means is it's the horse that like nobody expected to be in the race in the first place that ends up winning. So, it's not that thoroughbred that everybody is pretty safe betting on. It's really the one that sort of comes up from behind and surprises everyone and shows up in a really magical way. And that's really what we're obsessed with. One of the areas of really cool overlap between me and Chanté is that we've both always had this deep passion, curiosity, and admiration for people who sort of beat those odds and show up with historically marginalized identities that have made them overlooked and undervalued. And despite that, have really thrived, right? Have really taken that difference. And instead of trying to like fit into the basic mold, they actually like shine in that difference, and that leads to art, right? It leads to creativity, it leads to new ideas, it leads to innovation, and it makes this world worth living in. And that's really what The Darkest Horse, our firm, each of us, our whole team is really obsessed with, is like, how do we keep creating that beauty? How do we keep creating that future in a way that like is better for everyone, by celebrating, not just tolerating, but like actually uplifting that difference.
I love that, and so anytime that the word tolerating or tolerance is used in the context of diversity, equity, and inclusion, I think that it's always appropriate to just lean in and make sure that people are recognizing that there's a little bit of harm to that word, because we don't want people just to be tolerated, right? We tolerate things that are burdensome. People want to be celebrated, to your point, Rada. They want to be seen as accepted and valued. And so I think it's such an important message to make sure that people aren't trying to not notice difference, but to notice difference for the benefit of being able to see that difference as strength and as power, and to celebrate it. So I love the notion behind that. So Chanté, I want to get you into the conversation as well. Is there more that you want to say, since you are really the inspiration behind the name and the formation of The Darkest Horse?
Well, thank you, Rada. You did a beautiful job of capturing what that vision is. It's so cool. I mean, it always brings a little bit of tears to my eyes to hear people just be able to speak to that, because it's like you wake up one day with a vision or a dream and it's becoming a reality. And so one of the things I would say is that I'm going to bet everyone on this call is a dark horse. We show up to these conversations because this work is really important to us. And I think that Rada and I have used our real lived experiences, our identities, to inspire the work that we're doing. And so I feel that we do this on behalf of all the people who are othered and all the people who have been marginalized, and making sure that it's really that they've just been overlooked, and they haven't been given an opportunity. But there's value sometimes, I've found, in being the dark horse, because you get to sit back and learn. You get to watch, you get to observe, you get to perfect yourself without the spotlight. And sometimes that spotlight can be a lot to burden if we're already folks who are, who people are saying we're not going to win, to have that, that added pressure. Like, I mean, just look at Simone Biles, right?
Yes.
She's a perfect example of somebody who came in as a dark horse. All of a sudden she's shot to stardom. And we see that what has happened to this young woman. And so I like to use her as an example of the work that we're trying to do.
No, I love that. And I think that you're right. I'm sure that there are a number of dark horses that are part of today's community. And so in fact, if that's you and you feel so compelled, why don't we do #darkhorse into the chat just to show the sense of community, that we're all in a space that's safe and that's very communal and supportive. And so I love that. So as the two of you have described, the darkest horse represents people who have been marginalized or either underestimated. You mentioned Simone Biles, and there's so many other names, including names that are part of members of this community, as I see all those #dark horses get added to the chat, but based on their intersectional identities. And so what I want you to do is share with this podcast community the importance of intersectionality, and how does intersectionality inform the work that the two of you do? And Chanté, why don't you start with this one?
Sure. So, I think my belief, but also our belief that we share, is that identity, values, beliefs, rituals, those all inform culture, and they shape our lived human experience. And so therefore, identity and our unique intersectionalities are core to how we navigate and experience the world. And so we really advocate loudly for people to be able to have the right to show up and be their truest selves, and to lean into that growth edge. And it's, you hear it in the words we use, to lean into the growth edge of human potential. We know that doing those type of things is going to lead to a better in the future of work. We know that it's imperative for all of, not just work, but in all spaces that we experience life. So that's in our families and our communities and kind of greater world society. And so I think it's imperative that we get comfortable talking about intersectionality. I know that it's been around for a while. Thank goodness that there's been scholars who have been, really refining this notion, and now it's become sort of the vernacular of all of us who are in the space. But I just want to make sure that we continue to push on it, because it's a buzzword that I think some people start to dismiss a little bit. Maybe not us as practitioners and those who are advocating the loudest, but I do see it sometimes dismissed, and I refuse to let it go. I'm sure Rada has more thoughts though about it.
Well, there is one, I mean, of course, that's beautiful. I think the piece that I'll throw in is that I do think that the roots and the origins are really important. It's a term coined by Kimberly Crenshaw, and I think, and I think it's been co-opted a bit to be to mean a lot of different kinds of intersectionality, which also is important, right? Like my intersectional identities of queerness, of womanness, of, ability, of is important, right? And that complexity is important. But the origin of the term is really specific to Black women, and is specifically about the intersecting and overlaying oppression of Blackness and womanness, and the specific unique harm that we do, the danger that is imposed, the oppression that is imposed on Black women. And so I kind of don't like any conversation about intersectionality that does not recognize that specific import. And so I'll throw in the Kimberly Crenshaw. There's a video of her explaining what this means. I'll throw it into the chat. But yeah, I think that origin, that root, and I think honestly, a lot of equity, inclusion, anybody who uses the word liberation without recognizing that that's a word that belongs to Black women, right? And so I think it's really, really important to acknowledge that and to bring that into any conversation where we use any of those words.
No, absolutely. Thank you. I feel like I'm going to need that heart reaction to kind of stay up instead of going away after like a few seconds, because a lot of what you're saying is really resonating with me. And thank you for bringing that fact to the conversation regarding those two terms. Absolutely. So I want to understand how the two of you actually connected in this work. I mean, Rada, you were so generous to say, I just feel privileged to be here. Chanté brought me in, and this is really her vision, and I'm aligned with it. But I think that our audience would gain value in understanding what is the relationship that brought you to this point of now operating together as practitioners and partners in this space. Share the story. Who would like to share the story?
We love the story. Yeah,
I do love the story. It's a match made in heaven. Let me just say. So I'm in my, wearing my typical recruiter hat. I'm recruiting for a role at this awesome innovation healthcare company, and Rada becomes the final candidate. And she just knocked me off my feet. I mean, I just looked at her resume and I'm like, oh, I got goosebumps, like she's the one. And it wasn't even just the typical, oh, she's got this amazing career that's, you can see that she's a high potential kind of a candidate, but it was the stuff that she wasn't actually saying the loudest that was really interesting to me. Like all the stuff she had done while she was going back to school to get her master's, and just really showing up. And I could tell that she was a leader, that she had done a lot of grassroots organizing, that she had gone above and beyond the norm in terms of being just a typical high potential. And just, I was inspired. So I put her in this special pile that I kept, like, she's a person that I have to call back and try to get to know. Turns out that Rada was from Evanston. And at the time, that's where my family was living, and just north of Chicago on the North Shore. And that connection sparked more conversation. We went to lunch and I told Rada, hey, I'm going to start this podcast. This is the name of it. But you're you're the person I want to interview first, because I just think you're the bomb. And she listened like she always does. And I had a bunch of ideas, and she goes, tell you what, I'll be on your podcast and I would love to help you with your podcast, Chanté. I'd love to help you do anything you want to do related to this project. And I was like, oh, you would, Rada, you? She's like, yes, I'd love it. I love the idea. And later she told me, my friends have a nickname for me. I'm the idea midwife. And I was like, oh, yes, you are. Because I would come to her with these like million of ideas. And anybody who knows me, I walk around with like notebooks of ideas, and she could make meaning of them. And that really meant something to me, to meet this person who just like organically understood me. Was like, how I got so lucky. Yeah. I'm sure Rada has another version of the story, but I feel so lucky and grateful and inspired to be working with Rada, because she really is a thought leader in the healthcare industry. And a lot of people, look up to her.
So how does it feel, Rada, to be referred to as the idea midwife?
Well, I'm over here like totally not crying. Don't worry about it. Yeah, well, the idea midwife is maybe the best title after Darkest Horse that I have ever received, and it's true. I mean, I have a natural magnetism to brilliant visionaries who create way too many beautiful, amazing, inspiring ideas and need somebody to just catch them, as they're born, right? And like hold them and help them, on their way, right? And I was blessed with a brain that is really good at like operations and process and like that kind of like hard technical stuff that so many brilliant visionary people can't be bothered to spend their energy trying to focus on, especially so many people who are neuroatypical, right? And I have this great privilege, and it is a wonderful, wonderful thing that I get to meet people like Chanté. Although I've never met anybody like Chanté, but people who are brilliant, and get to like use that ability to realize really beautiful dreams. And it was just very clear that when I met with Chanté, that we. I often quote the great poet and say, I know there's strength in the differences between us, and I know there's comfort where we overlap. And that we found some really beautiful ways of that sort of individual, that appreciation for uniqueness and difference that was like a really, really strong foundation of overlap, and that we like both genuinely really enjoy when we think differently or see something differently, because we both get to learn. And those two facts are a really, really important part of a beautiful team, you know? And I think that so many teams over index on the similarity and under index on the learning opportunity. And, you know, every step, Chanté and I think the one last thing I'll say on it is that we recognize that the traditional ways that things work are oppressive and bad and extractive and not healthy. And so the hard part of our work is that every decision we make, every step that we take, we have to invent it ourselves, right? Because we can't trust that what I learned in business school was the right way to do things, right? In fact, we have to be pretty sure that what I learned in business school is probably the wrong way to do things. And so it's a lot of that work of saying like, okay, how do we run this through an equity filter, you know, and how do we reinvent this? And the ways that we really welcome challenge from one another is what makes that possible.
Yeah. So I have goosebumps now just hearing you both talk about the partnership, the relationship, and what each of you bring. I think it's beautiful. And so many of us are making notes on our to-do list. Go find us an idea midwife. Because that is so beautifully articulated, the way in which you talk about your skill. And I think that's lovely. So I want to talk about equity-centered design, because I know that's something that you focus a lot on. Yes. And Rada got really excited when I said that. So what does that entail exactly? How do you bring it to life? And just unpack that for us.
Yeah, I'll take a first pass if that's cool. Because yes, I do. I'm too excited to contain myself on it. I think so, you know, I think a lot of folks are familiar with the term human-centered design, right? Where this is about sort of building a lot of empathy with the people you're designing for, right? And like really understanding people in that complexity, and like moving a little bit away from a sort of normative identity and saying like, okay, how do I make my sense of my user, right, more inclusive, more extensive, more expansive. But what we do is we kind of take it a step further and really underline that part where it's designing for a user, and say, well, how could we actually take out designing for and instead make it designing with, right? That like equity-centered design, I think that's a huge challenge that a lot of organizations are getting wrong. Is like, you know, you and I'll use a black and white example again, although of course this kind of applies to straight folks designing for queer folks, to, you know, normative brains designing for non-normative brains. And I think that, you know, it's like we think that if we design something that we think is really good, and then we just make it available to other types of folks, that of course they'll want it. And we'll be shocked, and we'll say, oh, well, we need to go out to job boards. We need to go out to these audiences. And the problem is they don't know about it. And if they knew about it, they would want it. And the thing is like, no, maybe they don't want it because it's not for them, you know, and it's not, you didn't ask them, their voices, their perspectives, their needs are not thought about and not considered and not integrated into the design of this offering. And so equity-centered design is really about it's sort of twofold. The word equity sort of recognizes that the scales are tipped, right? That not all things are equal. And so equity is about trying to like account for that and saying we need different things, so we need to like try and untip it. And it's about that with instead of for. It's like, how do we do this with? And instead of me getting wealthy off of this market, right, that I'm designing for, that community is actually getting sort of wealthy, right, in some sense, out of this work, that it is actually a sort of servant leadership rather than a sort of savior position, which I think so much of design, right, where we kind of use design to mean like everything, right? Creation. So much of design is really rooted in saviorism and in supremacist notions. And so this equity-centered design that we're obsessed with is, how do we design, meaning in your organization, your products, your services, your offerings, you know, the way that you interact with your community, like how do we design all of those things through that equity lens that recognizes existing assets rather than existing needs, right? And really elevate that.
I love that. That's so important. So with and not for, and I often say nothing about me without me. So yes, we with and
Exactly.
not for. So hearing you talk about it at a high level, I mean, I think conceptually we all are tracking with you, but I want to try to get a bit more granular. So Chanté, is there an example of an equity-centered design, whether it's, whatever the final outcome may have been that the two of you or your company has been involved in, that you can share to help make this even more crystallized for this audience?
Well, we're in the middle of doing a few engagements actually, but I can't talk about them specifically right now. But I can
Okay.
give you examples of some work that I've done in the past, and I can see
Sure.
where there's clear difference. So before all of this, I started my career in reproductive justice. I worked with young people and I worked with young teens who were pregnant and parenting. And I had the great honor of being a program director and designing different kind of interventions for these pregnant and parenting teens. Now, I came from a good place. My parents were 19 years old when they had me, so I had a connection to that story.
Yeah.
I was really adamant about that. I had a cousin who had a baby when she was in high school, who I really was mentoring and cared a lot about. So it meant something to me. But where I was wrong is that I didn't invite those young women to the table when I was designing those solutions for their life. And it got to the point where one of the girls looked at me and she goes, "Chanté, you're not a mom, are you?"
Mm,
And I said, "No." She's like, "I can tell."
mm,
Because
mm.
the BS that you are telling me is not gonna work. I'm not gonna go to school all day. I'm tired. My boyfriend and we broke up. My mom's not supportive. His mom's not supportive. I'm just trying to graduate so I can get a job, so I can feed this baby, so I don't, all this stuff. And I looked at her and I was like, you know what? I'm so sorry. And I was embarrassed, right? But if I could back up and change that situation, I would have invited her, to the conversation. I would have said, "Look, we want you to be successful. You tell me how are you already being successful? Let's document that. Let's try to leverage those assets that you bring to the table and look at them as your strengths versus your weaknesses." And I think that from that day forward, I kind of vowed that I wouldn't do that to somebody else again. So the next opportunity I had working with young people, it was more of that community, it were in community and asset-based sort of development of work. And it really made a difference. I went on to develop a program with some youth in Minnesota, and it was for them, by them, and it was successful because they had a hand in it.
Yeah.
When I look back, that's why. And there's some really amazing organizations. There's one that comes to mind that's really unique in doing this, and it's Youth Prize
Mm,
in Minnesota. They're really great. Youth Prize with the S, not a Z. They're really, really unique. And what they focus on is that healthy youth and adult partnership because they do it in community and they're
yeah.
designing with and not for. And so
Yeah.
that has stuck with me, resonated, and I think we bring that into the work. And Rada has other examples of situations where she could probably speak to as well, but that's something that kind of just immediately comes to my mind.
What a great
Yeah.
example. It definitely helps crystallize it for me. And so, yes, Rod, if there's another example you want to speak to, feel free to share.
Well, I guess I'll kind of mention a few sort of big categories that we do this work in. And I think, Chanté points to, I think youth is my favorite one to point to in this because there is such condescension and, I mean, the entire education system is built around, youth being a blank canvas on which adults, paint wisdom, right? And we take a very opposite approach when we think about youth. I am obsessed with Gen Z and every generation that follows, because there are ways so much of the work that we do is unlearning, and there's such an opportunity that in seeing what is we're obsessed with the future. We're obsessed with like the way that the world is constantly changing, and youth brings this like vision that is not sort of tainted by all the way that things used to be. And so I think that you working with youth is a huge way that we do the savior stuff, that like we have a huge opportunity to learn a lot more than we teach. Healthcare, Chanté and I both have a lot of our career in healthcare. And so that spaces, we've both worked with populations that are sort of identified as like underserved, right? And I think even that paradigm of like, well, are they underserved or are they under extracted from, right? Like how are we actually thinking about what serving looks like? And what are they already doing that are the reasons that they're not signing up for our programs, right? And I think a third kind of different one that is a really specific and cool example is we did some equity-centered design stuff with a company that's doing work around like self-driving cars, right? And you think about car shares, ride shares, and transportation in general, and we think, oh, there are these neighborhoods, these again underserved neighborhoods that don't have these resources, and it's like, no, they have their own resources, right? A lot of communities have their own neighborhood car sharing, like in their family and their extended family in their neighborhoods. Like there's a lot of this kind of resource sharing, and it's just not being done through an LLC with a big bank account, And so I think that those kinds of like, organizations kind of fly in and say, oh, look, this market is not yet penetrated. And so like, let's bring this beautiful offering that like all the white people in the wealthy neighborhoods love, and will be the heroes here because they need this. And it's like, well, no, instead what you're doing is taking money away from these people, right? Because instead of them sharing the resources they already have, now you're taking their resources and you're bringing them back to the Bay, and so like that's the kind of stuff that we're really those are just like a few of the kinds of examples where we see it showing up a lot, but it's really in every industry, right? Like
absolutely. No, this is great. I want to stay here for a moment because I'm so intrigued by this. And, you've mentioned the word saviorism a couple times. And as we're talking about equity-centered design, I have a question that's coming up for me. And this is primarily because I'm seeing a lot of unfortunate infighting, if you will, within the space of practitioners who do this work. And so my question is, what are your thoughts and reflections on people who are not a part of those marginalized identities that are leading and doing this work? Can they really do it effectively with an equity-centered lens? And in order to do it effectively, what do you think needs to be a part of the consideration set?
I love this question.
I should probably chime in. I should probably chime in on behalf of white people. I think do. Because it's a thorny and complicated question, and I think
it is,
I think one of the things that Chanté and I and our team we talk about with clients, with groups that we meet with is who is responsible for this work, right? And there's such a big tendency to be waiting for someone else to be doing something before we do something. And we are huge on individual accountability, that every single person has agency, has influence, and has accountability. Right. And I think that, there's a lot of like, okay, we're waiting for leadership, we're waiting for HR, we're waiting for our folks with marginalized identities, we're waiting for our folks with privilege, like all of these, there's a lot of waiting going on and a lot of reasons to say you can't do this or I can't do this. And really what we say is you can do this. It's just a matter of how.
Yeah.
And I was just talking to a friend, another white person who is doing inclusion work. And I think, and he told me a story that he learned from someone else who happened to be a Black woman, because we learn a lot of our best lessons from Black women. And she had told him, she was like, imagine that we're all on a canoe and we're canoeing away from this island. It just happens that you are the worst canoeer on the canoe, but that doesn't mean you're just going to sit while the rest of us are going to row. You're going to fall out. You're going to drop your paddle. Like you're going to splash a little too much. You're going to do all this stuff, but like, you got to keep canoeing like your life, you got to keep paddling like your life depends on it. And so I think that like that humility is really important. Recognizing spaces where you're a guest and not in charge is very difficult, particularly for people with privileged identities, particularly for white folks. But that like, basically, I think one of the things that I often say is you should be listening 10 times more than you talk. And that when you do talk, recognizing, what the impact of your words are, what the sources of your words are, and really like, yeah, I think humility just is like the word that I say 100 times a day, and and the gratitude that goes with that.
Yeah, beautiful response. Chanté, would you like to add?
Yeah. Yes. I mean, I'll admit we've had this conversation so much because there's been times where people will come and they'll want us to do a thing, and maybe I'm unavailable and Rada's like, I'm not doing it without you. And I really respect and admire that about her, because if she wanted to just be all about money, she'd say, hell yeah, I'm taking that gig. And she'd go find somebody, and, but we really have to be discerning. And, I love that Rada pointed to, humility. I think that recognizing when you are a guest, and when, even here, like, I'll give the example of me being a mixed race Black woman in the United States, or in America, North America. Am I a guest? Was I invited here? No, my family, one half of my family were slaves. They were drugged here against their will. I have another half of my family who were immigrants, and then that whole story is kind of convoluted and crazy because half of them are Spaniards and some of them are mestizos, and so that's another interesting conversation. But I feel and I recognize today that I'm a guest on this land, and for me to go to the indigenous population and the folks who actually are stewards of this land and say, oh, let's talk about indigenous people and being marginalized, and what do you think? It's like they could take that so many different ways. And so I think we all have an opportunity, not just white people, but Black folks, other Latinos. We all have a responsibility to understand. This is why it's important to know your identity. It's important to have an understanding of where you come from. Even if it's a little thorny, even if it's a little uncomfortable, to get familiar with that origin story so that you know who you are in the context of the rest of the world and how they might see you, and then to intentionally build the future that you want. It's really, really critical. So I just love that question. But again, I'd love to also turn to like the community and hear from them in the chat and see how are other folks feeling, because this is something we have to do in community to change this paradigm.
No, Chanté, thank you. Thank you for that invite to get our audience members engaged. And this is a big conversation with a big ball of complexity around it in so many ways, but it is an important conversation. I am very much of the persuasion of the sentiments that the two of you shared. I think that we need all of us in this work in some capacity, and what that looks like for each person is going to vary. I am keenly aware that there are a lot of benefits to having majority leaders to be messengers of this work because of their influence and their connection points. But I'm also keenly aware of the need to make sure that they're being guided and discerning by the voice of those who are most directly impacted. And so those who I find do this work most effectively, regardless of what their identity may be, are those who realize that and they practice it consistently. And so I value that. I do want to get some reactions.
Yes,
can I throw one? Please, Rada.
Just because I love, I saw this comment in the chat that like, just because I'm Black, it already moved, sorry. Just because I'm Black, I don't necessarily have the answers. And I think two things that I want to like put a really fine point on. One is that, that elevating voices and what I'm kind of talking about like getting out of the way and making space instead of taking space. I want to be very clear that it's really important to recognize when you are expecting, demanding, requiring labor of folks that are oppressed. And so that can be a little bit tricky. And it can be, and I know that some folks are like, oh, how I can't get it right. I'm either, and it's like, yes, you actually probably can't get it right, but you can keep trying. And I think that like that is an important piece to balance. And I think the other piece is that I really want to put like a very specific point on is that white people doing, or, privileged, I keep saying white people as a kind of stand-in for folks with, privileged
Sure.
identities, but that white folks, and because I think, I think anti-Black racism is the biggest, ableism is a problem, homophobia is a problem, sexism is a problem, these are all problems, but anti-Black racism is I argue the biggest. And that white people have a lot of work to be doing in community with other white people. And so that's the space where it's okay to be messy, right? That's the space where it's okay to practice, practice your paddling skills so that when you show up for the canoe, you're not hurting anybody, right? And that, like, I used to really be opposed to that because I was like, rooms full of white people, like, you can't trust white people on their own to figure out racism because they don't get it and we're trained not to get it. But I think that I disagree with that now, and I think that that's actually where a lot of the hard work needs to happen so that we can show up in a more regulated, processed, anti-oppressive, non-harmful way when we are in mixed community.
Absolutely.
So I wanted to kind of put specifics on those two things.
I'm so glad you did, Rada. It's definitely a both and. So Wanda Williams, hi Wanda, thanks for joining us today. She placed into the chat, expecting a person to know all the answers because they're Black leads to Black fatigue. Book of the same title. Yes, so you're giving credit there to Mary Frances Winters, Black fatigue. Yes, and it is real. And so I so value this conversation. I know that there are a lot of people that are not willing to go there with the conversation because it is quite complex. And Chanté, I want to go back to your invitation to this audience to kind of chime in. If there's someone here today that, as you are, witness to the conversation that's taken place so far, and you want to add to the discussion, I want to give you an opportunity to unmute yourself and share right now. So I'm just going to pause for a second as I look around. And again, cameras are not required, but they definitely are encouraged. We love to see smiling faces. And so, Mark, I see your hand up, so I'm going to go to you.
Hey, yes, thank you, Dr. White. I am so thankful for the two of you for being here and just sharing your wisdom and gems. I guess because I'm a cisgendered, gender nonconforming, queer, disabled Latinx man. And so I'm always really aware of my male privilege, even though my male privilege is diluted because of my gender nonconformingness and my queerness and all the other things. So I guess my question is, how do we collaborate across difference? Because you two seem to do that so well, right? To collaborate across difference in a way that's equitable, that's intentional, that goes from, because we have teams, right? Like we say, we're a team, we can do this together, but there's power dynamics in that. And so how do you all do that together? How do you work across difference? That's my question.
So if Rada, I'm going to jump in here, but I know that you have some thoughts on this. So like one of the things as a recruiter, as a person who was looking for, the talent and everything, I tried to make matrices that would identify where somebody was different versus the same. Like we talk about cultural add versus cultural fits. And even as Rada and I have, very quietly and diligently built our little team of folk, we have said, where are we oversaturated in something, and where do we have an open opportunity to invite somebody in who will bring another perspective? Doesn't have to be on, they don't have to like the same politics we like. They don't have to drink the same tea we drink. In fact, we would prefer them not to. And very intentionally talking about that all the time. And you can't lose sight of it. And it's something that I think any company, any leader can do, because it could be just N of one. I can do that. One person can do that. And then as you continue to build the culture of whatever, community that you're trying to steward, you can invite that in. And so actually Rada and I have a community of folks we're working with, and we try to put that into our values and our communal, not necessarily rules, but our communal sort of norms, that we want to invite difference. And I think that what that might take is a constant scan of ourselves, knowing our identities and our intersectionalities, because we evolved as people. Mark, I'm sure you know this, like your queerness is on a spectrum, right? And as you get more comfortable with that identity, and everything you say, I'm going to step into this room in conversation today as this. And so that just requires that emotional intelligence and self-introspection and noticing who you are, but also at the same time noticing who others are too.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, mostly what I want to do is just agree with everything Chanté said. I think, and I'll say, like, there's the easy part and there's the hard part. And for me, I think the easy part is that if there's when Chanté mentions those places that were like over-indexed versus under-indexed, right? That the under-indexed items are weaknesses. That's an inability for us to meet the need of other people who identify or feel or see or believe or think the way that we don't, right? And that means that we're missing a bunch of possibility and ideas, right? And so bringing in difference is bringing in possibility. And so that's the easy part, is that like possibility is really exciting, especially for, people like us and the ones that we work with who are obsessed with imagining the future and what's possible. The hard part is that it's hard. And that like that does come with a lot of work. And things that, things when people think the same way, you get to answers quickly, and quickly often feels like great. It feels, oh, sorry, loud noise. Quickly often feels really important, especially, we work with a lot of startup and high growth organizations. And so quick feels critical. But quick doesn't get you to good. Quick gets you to easy. Mm-hmm. And so it is hard. It is more work. It is more intentional. It is, it is a process, and it does lead to conflict. Different people disagree. But when Chanté mentions the emotional intelligence, I think I want to like triple underline that, because so much of doing this work, but really any work that's worth doing, anything important, is staying regulated through it, through challenge, right? And being able to Chanté and I are both obsessed with sort of somatics, so like, stuff of the body and what our body does when we're in, tension or challenge or any kind of emotional activation, and noticing when we're bumping into something that feels important and that we're not feeling supported in, aligned in, whatever, and noticing when like I can feel like my blood pressure, I can feel my shoulders tense, I can feel my jaw tense, I can feel my tongue stick to the roof of my mouth, and just recognizing that and saying, I'm not going to die in this, this is not going to kill me, that we're going to come out the other side of this really smart and strong. So let me get a glass of water. Let me take a deep breath. Maybe let me just lean back in my chair for a second and say, we're on a team here and we're all doing the best we can. And that practice is really, really critical to working across difference. Being able to manage that, and that changes the group dynamic. When I can bring myself down, everybody else, both consciously and unconsciously, they come down too. When I take a deep breath, I can see on Zoom, when I take a deep breath, everybody's like, and that's really important for working across difference.
So simple, but yet so profound. Yes, please go for it, Chanté.
I'd like to add that one of the things we both skipped over is, yes, our obsession with somatic intelligence. So for me, my journey on that began, yes, in the healthcare field. I really was trying to understand all of the kind of alternative medicine, what we would maybe call as, indigenous, like shamanism and things like that, were also really intriguing to me. So as I got into cultural awareness and population health and stuff like that, my attention shifted immediately to what do all these grandmothers and shamans know. And so that started my journey, and I ended up getting into Reiki and healing touch and yoga philosophy and somatic experiencing, and on and on and on and on. Currently, Rada and I are both in a community with Rasma Menicum, and we're learning more and more about that somatic experiencing in our own respective communities. So for me, I'm with a group of, you know, Black-bodied people. Rada is with a group of white-bodied people. And that was really intentional, you know, and I think gravitated towards that because I could see that I was ready in my journey on somatics to be with people who looked like me, because that had never been my experience. When I went to yoga teacher school and did all of that, I was the only Black person in the room, the only Latina in the room, with the only one with the big hips, the only one that couldn't get into these full poses. And for people to put their hands on my body and try to force me into a position felt so metaphoric to what I was experiencing in my professional life. I was just like, oh, this is something, isn't it? And so what I learned though was that, you know, the work comes for me getting on that mat, or by me being in practice every day and noticing my own body and not really noticing what others are saying to me. And just the more that I could drop in to myself and return home to my center, you know, led to my own spiritual freedom and liberation. And I recognize that that is actually the work I'm here to do. Today, it shows up as DEI. But for me, really beyond this conversation, it's about reminding people who you are, that you are innately born with power, that you are innately born with intelligence that is so beyond what you could cognitively understand, and to return to home. And so that's going to be a journey that we have to, you know, we have to consciously become aware of. And it's every day, it's an invitation. I have to ask myself every day, who are you and why are you here? You know, and if I feel myself getting ahead of myself, I look down at my feet and I say, okay, this is where I am. I look at my body, this is who I am in this form. And I'm here on a mission, you know, and it's beyond myself. So it's doing that and just sort of staying centered and regulated has, I think, been powerful for me on my journey. And I know Rada has joined me on that, but it's evolving. It's beautiful to do it in community with people who want to do that too.
Incredibly powerful. Thank you. I'm watching the time and we have only a few moments left. And I do have another question, but I will forego my question if there's someone, a part of this audience, that would like to present a question at this time. I'll give it a moment in case you want to raise your hand, or for those who may not have your camera on, if you want to just unmute and present your question. Okay, so not hearing that, I'm going to go ahead and ask my last question. And when I was giving the introduction at the beginning, I talked about the fact that you explore 4 different domains as you're working with clients, and one of which is the future of work. And that is something that's so important to so many people right now, because we're having to reimagine the future of work due to so many circumstances, including the distributed, workforce that we're finding ourselves in right now. So what are maybe the top 2 or 3 things that you would like for this audience to know relevant to the future of work in terms of what you predict, what you're seeing, or what we need to hold in mind that also helps us to, again, embrace and celebrate difference?
Sure. You can see we're always like,
who's gonna go?
Yeah, it's great. We're always making space. I think, I think one of the things that is really, really important here is change, right? That like we really, really believe in, Adrienne Maree Brown has a lot of scholarship and content and thought leadership around this idea of having an emergent strategy, right? And that you can create a vision and create what you imagine you wish to be true, and be very, very open and flexible to the reality of all of the things that are going to change that you never did imagine. And that those things are not threats, right? Those things are just more opportunity. And I think that's really, really how Chanté and I show up to this. And I think, I think a constant wonderment at change and possibility, and that kind of openness is really a big piece of it, and staying true and anchored and rooted in your values and what what will always be true and what will always be stable and secure. And so I think that's, we talk sometimes about like, what is that North Star and how do I just keep making decisions, the million decisions a day that I make that goes either in direct opposition or in that direction. Right. And that's really the work of equity and inclusion as well. We have 1 million opportunities every single day to make choices that are along with the status quo and therefore inherently oppressive, or intentionally in opposition, and making a new possible future. And so I think that when we talk about the future of work specifically, a lot of folks talk about, I think that the most sort of obvious one is this sort of like distributed workforce where we're no longer competing for a 5-mile radius around a physical office of talent, where you can still have a lot of diversity, in some identities, but you have very limited diversity and worldview and other identities. And instead, we're now competing, for a world of talent, and that the best talent is going to look, sound, act, move, need, think a lot of different ways. And when we come back to this part of like, when, all of these like ROIs for diversity and how like much better we do when we're in a diverse group is not actually because of diversity, it's because of inclusion, right? It's not having the people in the room, it's having it be a space where that difference is not just tolerated, it's celebrated and supported, right? And so I think that, when we think about why diversity in that world, and now we're at time, I've been talking too long. I think I'll just stop there. That's sort of the like reality of the future of work that we really have to be oriented on.
Great. Chanté, I want to give you the last, 30, 60 seconds to close this out with whatever's coming to mind for you.
Yeah, I think the future of work has to be intentionally designed. If we're not careful, we're going to design another sort of future and systems that are very oppressive. And so my kind of reminder to everyone is to start to do that inventory of who you are and figure out where you have opportunity to bring people's voices who are very different from yours. So whatever it is you're doing, because we're all doing work. So right, we all design the future of work together in our relationships and in our actual birthing of programs and their services and offerings. And so just doing that is going to change our reality. There's some really great folks who are designing technologies that are actually going to give us vision for what that future could look like. And I've been trying very intentionally to be in community with them too. And so maybe if you have the reach within your kind of circles of influence to do those things, I encourage you to do that.
Lovely. Rada, Yovovich, and Chanté Martinez Thurmond, thank you so very much for joining us today as our guest co-host. It was wonderful conversation. We could have gone on for at least another hour, but we really appreciate you sharing with this audience. Look forward to continuing to follow your work and support you in any way that we can. I want to thank all of you who've joined us today. We don't take it lightly that you spent this time with us. Be on the lookout this afternoon for an email, which will share the link to the replay of this session. And if you found value in it, feel free to share it with others. And we look forward to hopefully seeing you again next Friday. Thank you all so very much.
Thank you
Have
so
a great
much.
weekend.
Thank you so much, Dr. White. Thank you so much to your team, who is also awesome. And also to the group that came. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Bye-bye.